we're starting our cordwood on the sauna, and so I'm going to kind of go over the process of what we're doing. This is only our second day, so it will, in later videos, I'm sure we'll have different little tweaks to it, but I wanted to show the start of it. So we already did one little wall, and that previous video I just did, uploaded yesterday. At the end, it shows what we came up with. And I'll go over what we kind of found after it drying for like 5 days. But I just wanted to show you the process of making this paper enhanced mortar. There's a guy named Alan, and I'm probably going to butcher his last name, Stankovic, that built a home. He built it about 20 years ago, and it's in this book, which is probably my favorite cordwood book that I've been reading, by a guy named Richard Flatteau. Not sure if I'm getting his last name right either. But anyway, this is a really good book. It's got lots of good information. But this Alan, I actually visited his house, this one right here. And his is a 16-sided, 2-story, double-wall cordwood home. So each side is in an 8x8 post and beam frame. And he built it back in 2001. I think he finished it in like 04 or 05. It took him a long time to build it, but he did it all himself. And he kind of made up this mortar, tweaked a different like papercrete, and made a paper enhanced mortar is what he called it. And that's what we're using, because I visited his house, and 20 years later it looks mint. I mean, the mortar is nice and white, so it brightens up the wall, because if you have all this wood and then you have a darker mortar bead around it, you know, it darkens up your home. And his was nice and bright, and almost had like an adobe, I guess is what I would explain, look to it. And he had very little cracks. I mean, very few. So it looked like a really good option. So that's why we're trying it on our cordwood house, to see if it's for us. So this is the process. We don't have running water here. That's a whole nother story. Hopefully the well guy gets here. I think he's just going to show up. He's not going to give me any time. But anyway, neither here nor there. We have, so we're basing all of our water off rain gutters and collecting water. So we actually have to save as much water as possible. So we're collecting them in these barrels, and then these stock tanks and stuff, and transferring them to these barrels. So what you do is you take newspaper, and it's the good newspaper, not the ads or anything like that. You don't want the shiny stuff. And we're putting it in barrels. Now, my wife just threw in folded pages in this barrel. And in this barrel, what she did last time and this time, is she actually took each page and put it in here, which I'm guessing is takes a little bit more time, but it's going to be easier to mix up. So you put this newspaper in water, and for 24 hours. We did it yesterday around 2 or whatever, not quite 24. But when she takes each page and puts it in there, I'm guessing it's going to soak up the water a little bit quicker. And then you slurry it. You mix it up with a big mixer. And I have actually used just a regular 1/2-inch truck drill to run this mixing blade, and it works well. But, you know, this drill isn't made to handle that big mixer for long periods of time. First of all, you go through a lot of batteries. You know, probably goes through a battery every less than 10 minutes. And I actually have, you know, multiple drills. So here's a Makita that I use too. And they both handle it with a 1/2-inch chuck. But it's not ideal. Just me being in the trades, that drill isn't made to handle that kind of abuse constantly. I'm going to burn up the drill. So what I do is every battery change out, I would switch drills. But now I got the big guy. So this is what I use to drill out homes for electrical. So this thing is made for that. So, and it's a DeWalt, which is the best. So I'm going to start mixing this up, and what you want to end up with is a very fine cut up piece of paper in the end. It almost doesn't look like paper anymore. It's so chopped up in little bits. It'll look like kind of like worm bedding. So that's what you want to get. You don't want, you know, pieces even of this size. You want to probably chop it up even more than that. Now, I'm no expert, but even pieces like this, when you have them on the surface of your mortar, you can actually grab it and pull it off. So you want it chopped up real fine, which doesn't really take that long. I would say, you know, I'm probably going to be at this for 15, 20 minutes. Again, haven't done this very long, so this will all be tweaked. And then we came up with a really good way to drain the paper. So once you get it all mixed up, I was told then to take that and put it in another container with like holes in it to drain all the water. So then you don't have, you have wet paper, but it's not, you know, in standing water. It's not absolutely soaked, you know, it's just wet paper. But that takes a lot of time. So we came up with a different way. And this is kind of our system. So we have a tote under here because, again, we have to collect this water because we'll use that for tomorrow's batch. And we have this big metal screen that was my headache rack for my van when I bought it. So that's like almost like a grill type thing. And then we took an actual door screen and put it on top. And what we do, and I'll show you this. And just doing it that many times, you can see it's already cut it up quite a bit. But you need it pretty fine. You end up with that. Very fine cut up paper. So that's what you want. The next step would be to grab your wood and bring it to site. So you want a kind of mixture of wood. You want some rounds. You know, a lot of people do all rounds, all splits. We're doing a mixture. I would say probably 80% split and 20% rounds. The split dry quicker, and you have less cracks in the wood then. You don't have that primary crack, which will let air infiltrate because that crack goes all the way through that log. But you won't get that with splits. But it looks nice to have both, in my opinion. So that is what we're going to do. But you want to collect kind of a random assortment of sizes. When you drew your wall, you're going to need some smaller pieces in different areas and stuff, or larger. And that's what kind of gives you that random pattern, is if you put smaller ones and bigger ones next to each other. If you start out doing that right at the bottom of the wall, then the wall kind of takes care of itself, that random pattern. You don't want rows, at least in my opinion. It looks better if it's completely random. Just fold over one side. And just squeeze the water out of it. And the paper won't go through that fine stream. And then we take all this and we put it into a 5-gallon bucket with little holes punched in it everywhere, so some of the water will drain out of there as we're working. So in this way, we save all this water, put it back in the stock tank out of the tote. And then at the end of the day, we can take all the water out of this tote, put it back in those barrels and then put more newspaper in it, because we're pretty much solely relying on rainwater at this time for doing this project, because we don't have any running water right now. So now we're just kind of prepping our little work area here so the mortar doesn't fall right on the concrete, and we're going to continue laying up this wall. I think we did a pretty good job with the random pattern. You know, we started out with a small one and then a big one next to it, and it kind of worked itself out where there are no rows. So then we got to mix up the insulation, which I've heard 9-to-1 all the way to, I believe, 12-to-1. The sawdust is about 5 scoops to 6 scoops per 1 scoop of lime. So what we've been doing is 5 scoops of sawdust, and then we have our lime in here, 1 scoop of that, and then another 5 of the sawdust, and then just mix it up with a hoe. And then you just mix it up real good. What the lime does is when the insulation is in the wall, it keeps bugs out. They're not like attracted to it. They don't want to get in there. And then also, if any moisture gets into the wall, it hardens and makes almost like a plaster, a hardened cake of that mixture, is what I've been told anyway. And so moisture doesn't affect it. The mixture is 2 slurry paper, which you put in first, then 2 sand, and then 1 type N mortar mix. Fill this container up twice with the paper. Now I'm going to fill up this container because the sand's over there. 2 of these in the bucket, dump it in, and then again 1 of the type N mortar mix. So the first thing you want to do is lay down your starting mortar beads, and they say not to go much more than 2 feet when you start, which this is just a 2-foot wall, so it works out perfect. And then this is an 8-inch cordwood wall, so it's 2.5-inch mortar beads, 2 of them, and then a 2.5-inch center section for the insulation, and then you want a 1/4 inch on the outsides, so the logs will be proud of the mortar. And then once you get the 2 mortar beads put down, you lay down the insulation, and you don't want to get that on the mortar because then the next mortar that you put down won't stick as well. So you fill this in and kind of hump it a little bit, not so that it's flush, but that it's actually over the top of the mortar bead, because then when you settle the log on, it'll kind of squash it down a little bit and there won't be any voids. Something like that. And then you can start taking your pieces of wood and put them in the mortar. And then like this one, I think before I lay it down, I'll pack up the mortar on the sides, because it's harder to do it afterward, right? So you stick it in there first and then push it into it. And then you get your next piece of wood, and maybe I'll make that one larger, so then that random pattern starts like developing. And then you put the mortar over the top of these logs, and then you put your insulation, and you keep on doing that. So it's mortar first, then insulation, then the log ends. And we also use keyways. This will go all the way to the top, and actually on the top header, we'll put keyways too. Or if I had a window, I would put them all along the sides, bottom and top. And what that does is the mortar wraps around it, and then once it dries, it holds it in there for a stronger bond to the wood.
puppies. Buddha. I think we should build up all the way before I put that.
You can probably squish that down in the corners quite a bit. Found today that it's definitely easier to work with if it's a little wetter. It was too crumbly before, and once we added water to the mix, then it was more like Play-Doh, if you will. It compacted, there was no voids, and it was easy to wrap around the keyways. You can kind of see how wet it is. Now, of course, it's going to take longer to dry, but that's not a big deal. And if you look, the moisture is going into the logs right now. You can see the dark areas, the moisture sucking into the logs. And then if we come over here, what we did earlier today, there's hardly any of that. Well, it is there a little bit, but this isn't happening because it was drier when we put it on and more crumbly, and it was hard to work with, and we were kind of complaining about it that this was harder than it was last week. Well, added a little bit more water, and now it's a lot easier to work with.
And probably easier to smooth out when you're pointing it.
So I think one thing we found is you need to add more water because it's way easier to work with. So it's easily packed. It's not crumbly. When you stick it on the wall, you don't have like splits like that. It's really easy not to have that when it's wet. The other thing is when we were screening that paper, what we were doing is getting the water out, and that's great, but we were compressing the paper. So then when you go to make your mixture, the paper's super compressed, and you don't want that, because what you end up with when you start throwing the mortar on the wall is clumps of paper on the face of it. So when you start pointing, you'll have a clump of paper that just falls off. So you want the paper to be separated a lot. You want the sand and everything to be around each little piece of paper. So in the end, you don't have any clumps. Like when I break this down, it almost looks like there's no paper at all. You don't want to find a clump where you tear it and then all you see inside is paper. So you want to get rid of that. So what we've been doing is taking a little plastic screen and then after we put the paper in the wheelbarrow and then the sand on top of it, we grab that mixture and we start screening it kind of through here, and that breaks up these clumps, because otherwise you'll get like a bunch of sand over the top of this clump and you'll peel it apart and all you'll see is paper, and that's not what you want. And then we've also been using a tad more of the type N mortar mix. So just like so if we fill this as our 2 paper, 2 sand, 1 mortar mix, we'll just put another inch or so in this, because that's like the glue that sets this all up, and it'll make it stronger, hopefully. We have yet to have it all dry, but we'll see what happens.
Why aren't we using the mortar mixer, honey?
Oh, and then the mortar mixer, we can't use that because it didn't come with gear oil, and the people who sold it to me, when they said it was all ready to go, it wasn't ready to go, because thank God I checked the gear oil in there, and
what kind of oil does it take that we don't have, that I didn't even know existed?
And it takes an 80 weight 90 gear oil, which we don't have laying around here. One of the things that we don't have. So we can't use that. We'll have to keep on doing the wheelbarrow until we go back to town next week when we come back. I was going to say one other thing. Oh, and then I do have the electrical done. So we'll have a stack switch here. One switch will be for the inside light, one for the, I'm sorry, the changing room light. The other switch will be for the
Sauna?
light in the sauna. And then I just want to point out to, hopefully the electrical inspector in Eau Claire is watching. This is not to code, and because I'm an electrician, and I purposely didn't put this staple within 8 inches of the box because you can't do anything about it. He can't do anything.
Huh.
I'm gonna say that. It's so freeing knowing that he might know this, and he can't do anything about it. You can't tell me what to do. I'm in the middle of nowhere, so. I've been using the same containers to mix too. This one's what I've used to mix the mortar, and then I use this little can to put some extra water in. And it seems to help use the same container all the time, and then you get a feel for how much to add and stuff. And the mortar is all feel. You don't want it too wet, and otherwise it just kind of slumps and it can't carry the weight of the wall. It'll start kind of squeezing out and stuff. And if it's too dry, then it's too crumbly. Also, if it's too wet, you can't go vertical. If you have a log end that's kind of points straight up and down, it's hard to stick it vertically because it'll just fall down. So this is what we got done in about 4 days. Not super long days. I'm baiting bear and doing other things, but we probably worked, I'd say 4 hours a day, 4 or 5. So we finished up this wall, added that beam there, did this whole complete wall and this one. So I'm going to be putting a window on this side, so I have to make that window box frame, and then I'll have to hang it from the ceiling, level it up, get the height right, and it'll be the same size as the one in that door there. So I'll get that done next week, and start putting the posts on the house actually next week, so we can get that rolling because my wife won't be here, and this is kind of tedious by yourself. It's nice to have a person on either side of the wall working. So by myself, I can hopefully set these posts for the house. Well, this time we figure out a few things. I think we got the mixture right, and we know how much water to put in. So we got that down. The only thing I'm worried about is the strength of the mortar. So right now I have a little bead over here, about 10 inches long and 2 inches thick, that I'm going to test after it dries. The first mortar that we used, I don't think had enough cement in it, so we've been putting in a little bit more of that type N mortar cement. So I'm going to see how strong that is, because the first part kind of breaks somewhat easily. And then I think next week also I'm going to try a different mortar mix, a more traditional Cordwood mortar mix. This again is the paper enhanced mortar, and there's another traditional mortar that they used wet sawdust instead of the newspaper, and they use hydrated lime in it too. So I'm going to try that next time and see how we like that. I think this mortar mix is going to be fine for the sauna. We'll finish the whole thing so it's a uniform color, but maybe we might want to use a different one for the house. I'm not sure. But we'll find that out and we'll kind of test it. The difference between the two is I think one's a little bit stronger, the traditional mortar, but you have to, it dries within like 3 hours. You only have 3 hours to lay it up and then point it. This one I can actually manipulate the next day. I mean, this was laid yesterday and you can still push on it and move it around a little bit to smooth it out, so, which is nice. But the other traditional mortar mix I think is harder and more like cement, but again, I haven't tried it, so we'll see. The other thing we learned this weekend was not to use that screen and squeeze all that water out. That's unnecessary. It's better to just leave it a few hours laying on the screen and let the water drip through, and then use that, because you're going to end up adding water if you do that squeeze method. So we tried it, and it's not necessary. So we learned that too. It also compresses the paper and makes it more clumpy, because you want it to be broken up and be distributed throughout the mortar, and you don't want big paper clumps. And you can kind of see that in our older mix as it dries. You can actually see the kind of clumps of paper. Those light areas are paper. So in the new mortar mix, we don't have that as much. And in the end, I'll tune up all these logs, I think, after everything is set and cured. I could take a grinder to this and kind of brush those logs off, or a sander, and sand them and make them all look bright. I don't know if we'll do that or not, but it's an option. After about, I don't know, we've been waiting about 3 hours later, we come back and point it. And my wife uses a spoon. She just takes a spoon and smooths it out with the back half of it. But I've been using my finger, which I prefer, because the spoon makes kind of like ridges. And I can push it in and stuff with my finger around the logs to get it nice and tight. And that's what that's for. The pointing is to make a better adhesion, I guess, to the mortar, to the logs, and then also to make it more appealing, get rid of all the rough edges and stuff from the mortar, and kind of balance it out, kind of smooth everything out.